Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to a little poem. It is quite an unusual poem. In fact, I would argue there's no poem really like this poem in all of Leaves of Grass. Shakespeare-Bacon's Cipher. Now, this is poem 11 of the 31 of Goodbye My Fancy, and it's strange that it ends up in this cluster because most of the text in this cluster has something to do with aging and potential dying. But maybe this does as well once we get into it. Now, the background here is going to be important, but first let's start with our assumptions. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net, down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt, our playlist, and that you've been with us all the way through all of the readings of Leaves of Grass, right up to and including a set of introductory comments for Goodbye My Fancy, and then we just finished with Pending Year. Now, our Nortons will first of all tell us that this poem, this interesting little poem, that an early manuscript, draft manuscript, actually had the title, The Mystic Cipher, and a subtitle, A Hint for Scientists. It was first published in the Cosmopolitan of October 1887. Now, this is a fascinating little poem, because it resurrects the question that we've spoken about many times in room 303, what is often referred to as the Shakespearean scholarship question, the authorship question. Who actually wrote these amazing poems that we love so much, attributed to Shakespeare, whoever that was? Now, we know, I say we know, we assume, as scholars suggest, that it was probably Ignatius Donnelly's theory that Whitman was working with that suggested that really Whitman was, or that Shakespeare was actually not Shakespeare, but in fact the plays were written by Francis Bacon, and that there were certain kinds of hidden systems of ciphers that were involved. Now, this idea had started in 1888 with the book, The Great Cryptogram, Francis Bacon Cipher in the so-called Shakespeare plays. Okay, and that's the Donnelly text. But there's an interesting history here that starts actually way back with the very first book by William Henry Smith, that was titled, Was Lord Bacon the Author of Shakespeare's Plays? That's 1856. And then in 1857, Bacon will offer The Philosophy of the Plays of Shakespeare Unfolded, and she will as well provide some notion of a cipher to read the idea of the true author. Now, you got to go online to YouTube and just type in Shakespeare authorship question and just watch the many people that can get seriously fired up about this debate, right? And of course, most scholars today will say, yeah, Shakespeare wrote these plays, whoever Shakespeare was. We don't know a lot about Shakespeare, as we've said in my lectures on Shakespeare at LearnStrong.net. What I find interesting about this poem is that Whitman himself doesn't seem to take sides. Instead, he transcends the argument and he does something quite remarkable. Notice, I doubt it not, then, more, far more. In other words, man, I don't know, I thought about this. In each old song bequeathed, by the way, notice all the uses of the dashes, in every noble page or text, and then in parenthetics, different, something unrecked before, something unsuspected, some unsuspected author, in parenthetics, in every object, mountain, tree, and star, notice your threes, in every birth and life, as part of each, evolved from each. Evolved, of course, is a key word. Meaning behind the ostent. A mystic cipher waits, enfolded. Now, this is a fascinating little poem. He completely bysteps the authorship debate. Who wrote these plays? Was it Shakespeare? Was it Bacon? And he says, who cares? Because all of life has this mystic cipher to it. And it doesn't really matter. Now, what's going on and why is this poem in this cluster? That is to say, the very last, one of the last poems in Leaves of Grass is this one. I think that what Whitman is trying to do is to himself preempt the question that we've been asking from the very beginning. The great Harold Bloom, of course, pointed this out long ago. Whitman is constantly promising that he is going to provide some kind of authorship information. He never gets around to it. Or doesn't he? He gives us Leaves of Grass. That is to say, these poems. And what is it about Leaves of Grass that's most significant? Well, go back to the poem. The mystic cipher waits, enfolded. Now, he's used this phrase before, right? This idea. And think about how the power of Leaves of Grass and the idea of enfolding is going to be significant. To that degree, I find this a remarkable little poem. To a he's going to argue it. True art always has a mystical element, a mystical cipher to it. And 2b, I love that in the poem there's no actual mention of Shakespeare or Bacon, and I love in the poem that he drops all these words from these other texts that I just mentioned, but he doesn't weigh in on it. He bypasses. He's like, who cares? What in the end matter does it make? Of course, for a lot of people it matters a lot, as you'll see if you go online and take a look at some of the people who get fired up about this authorship question. At 3a, I mentioned those 3 titles, and I think that's significant because the question of authorship is always a fascinating one. Not only why, but who, as we mentioned. Finally, at 3b, go and take a look at this, and then I'll ask you, where do you come down on this whole question of Shakespearean authorship? And to what degree do you believe that all great texts have this mystical cipher, a mystical element to it? I'm certainly hopeful that by this point you do believe that there's some of that happening in Leaves of Grass. Thank you.